Ready to move to the next level in your product career? I'm Shobhit from Intentional Product Manager. Join me as we discuss ways to help you stand out in your job search and your career so you can have more impact and make more money. Sachin, thank you so much for talking with me today.
My pleasure. So honored to be here.
Awesome. Tell us a bit about yourself. I'm sure folks are eager to know who they're talking to.
Yeah, well, whenever I get asked this question, I always go back to like the very beginnings and where I was born and grew up. So, surprisingly to some people, I grew up in Spain, spent all of my childhood there, and moved to the U.S. Right before starting senior year of high school. Went to undergrad at the University of Missouri Columbia, where I studied business management and computer science. And that was, it's kind of interesting because I got my first computer when I was 7, and I've been hooked to the software development ever since. And then when I joined college, I kind of I think I want to be more in business, but I also realized my first year in that I didn't want to give up the computer science and the coding part. So I did both. And then I worked in healthcare IT consulting for some time before going to business school at Carnegie Mellon, Tepper School of Business. Then I joined Amazon for a couple of years. And then I joined Google, and I've been here for 14 years in a variety of teams, over 14 years now.
Awesome. So you've seen, did you also join Google as a product manager initially? Were you in other roles?
No, I joined as a strategy and operations manager, and I came from Amazon where I was a senior financial analyst. So, coming out of business school, you tend to go more for more general or business oriented roles. And so when I first joined Google, it was a strategy and ops role. And I actually had to go through the formal interview loops to become a product manager. But I did that just a couple of years into Google.
Often people are fascinated about how people got into product management. So did you do I've seen people do rotations or just do some projects as product managers at Google before they transitioned in. Was there a similar path?
No, it was, and I remember still, right? Like when I was looking into it, I had a bunch of conversations with people, and they're like, "Yeah, this is what you should do to prepare, or you can do rotations." And something that's interesting that at the same time that I joined Google, sort of without any intention or planning behind it, I started building a mobile app. That's when just the mobile, ecosystem and just people creating apps was really trending. And my wife was starting dental school, and I had a bunch of time on my hands. I'm like, let me just make a mobile app. And one thing led to another, and I made the mobile app, and then I shipped it. A bunch of people downloaded it, and it was a recipe app, and everything was on device. And then it got so big that it started crashing at some point. I'm like, okay, maybe I should get a back end. So I built a back end for it at Google App Engine in a database, and then I did CI/CD, full stack basically over time. And that's right around that time I started thinking about transitioning to product management, and that actually really helped the interviews because people would ask me so why do you want to be a product manager? What experience do you have? I'm like, I do have a CS degree and I know how to code and all of that, but here's something that I actually built. And They were fascinated because even at Google, most people don't do that end-to-end kind of development. So I understood mobile, I understood back-end, server side, authentication, analytics, logging, all of it. And so that helped during the interviews, but the rest of it was, interviews, had to prepare like anybody else. And so what's interesting is that my first role was in Google Cloud, and I helped launch the Google Cloud SDK. There was no unified SDK. So I kind of, because I did a lot of development on my own, I kind of gravitated towards developer tools. And I've kind of stayed in that space ever since.
Love it. So I'm going to fast forward and then maybe take us back a little bit. Tell us about your current role. What do you do? And tell us day to day, how it looks like. I know there's no typical day to day, but tell us more about it.
Yeah, the day to day is definitely tough to describe, but I'll tell you what my current role is. So I lead a team that focuses on on-device machine learning within Google. And within our group, we have several different teams. We have a focus on bringing some of the latest applied ML research to run on devices. So if you use, for example, in Google Meet, you see blurred backgrounds, or if you use YouTube Shorts, you see all those effects. A lot of those capabilities run fully on device. And people are familiar with TensorFlow, and then TensorFlow Lite allows you to convert models to a TensorFlow Lite format to run them on device. So we have a developer offering. And then we also have an infrastructure team that makes sure that all of this ML that runs on devices runs as efficiently and performantly as possible. So we have, XNNPack, for example, is one of our libraries that runs ML efficiently on CPU, for example.
Awesome. So now let's go a little bit through the journey. So like you currently group PM for this. Do you mind telling me a bit more about like journeys through various levels and in whatever detail you can, and focusing on what do you think were like key things that changed as you went through different levels?
Yeah, I mean, I can go back to sort of the first role I had as a PM. I mean, and this is a great question, because as I think about it and I reflect, it's easy for me to now think about some of the differences across the different levels and the different roles. But I perhaps did not do as great a job consciously preparing for what those changes would be. So yeah, I'm hoping that this helps your listeners and plan their careers as they hear some of these experiences. So I started, as I said, on the Google Cloud team, and I was an individual contributor, and I had two products that I was managing. One was a plugin for an IDE. So Eclipse was the most popular. I'm dating myself here, but that was the most popular IDE back then. And so there was a Google plugin for Eclipse, and I was the PM for that. And then sort of my larger project that came a little later was the Cloud SDK, and the cloud, both Google, but also like AWS and Microsoft, it was starting to become a big business. And leadership realized like, hey, we can't really have like command line tools that are individual for every product offering that we have within Google Cloud. We need a unified SDK. So that was my first sort of like big project. And it involved talking to a variety of different product teams and convincing them of the need to give up some of the control that they had in developing their tools, but like opting into creating this larger unified cloud SDK. So that was my first opportunity. From there, I got the opportunity to join Google Android, or what soon became Google Play, and I was the first PM having to do anything with ads in Google Play. And so you can think of Google Play as, what does it do? It's like a store. You download apps, and that's kind of what you do. But there, the higher level objective from leadership was, Google is an ad company. A lot of the things that we do come from advertising, and we have nothing in Google Play. So I had a couple of big projects there. One was just like building the infrastructure to help with that, to help with what becomes like ad targeting and that sort of thing. And then also launching ads within the Play Store itself. So now if you go to the Apple App Store or Google Play Store, you search for something, you see ads. I also remember doing a project around showing in the description of the app when an app is ad supported. So that was a big thing in terms of like transparency for users. And as simple as it may sound, right? You look at an app and it says ad supported. Actually, a lot of work and a lot of thought went into showing that, because a lot of it is having users opt in, but then you also have a lot of infrastructure in the back to actually also be able to determine what type of ads, or if ads are shown or whatnot. So that was my my second project. From there, I went to Firebase, where you and I met, and I loved my time there. I helped launch MLKit, which was still is an SDK for machine learning for devices, and it had two parts to it: on-device APIs and cloud-based APIs. And then within Firebase, I grew to actually manage a team and to a larger scope. And so hopefully that kind of answers that question. I think that was the pivotal moment for me, where I had one pretty large, pretty impactful project that had a lot of visibility, had a lot of developers using it. And from there, I was able to grow my scope to just from MLKit, which was offered as part of Firebase, to Firebase authentication and databases and hosting and serverless and ML and storage as part of the whole package. And that's also when I started managing people.
Got it. Yeah, I still remember the ML kit launch because it was a big deal and it was announced at I/O and all that. So that was obviously went very well. You started to mention a bit about managing people, but like when people look at Google and they look at like product managers, it just seems externally they're all doing similar things, find it hard to differentiate. How do you see the differences in different levels? What changes as you go up levels?
I mean, I think a few things that change are you start. It's a level of ambiguity, for example, is one of them. Um, at when you're starting in your career, you're given a specific project. If you go back to the Google plugin for Eclipse that I had or the Cloud SDK, we were pretty much told, hey, here's what's needed and execute, right? And that still requires a lot of work and it needs to be done right. And you still need to talk to customers and make sure that you're building the right thing. And sometimes if the request is not asking for the right thing, you have to push back on that too. So, but it's more focused on execution. And I think as you go, you become more senior, you start identifying opportunities yourself. Or if you're still, in many cases, even if you are dealing with ambiguity, you may not come up with a problem space or solution yourself, but you might be given a problem that's like a little more intractable.
Sure.
More complex to solve. So the level of complexity, the level of ambiguity, the level of influence that you need to have outside of sort of your own circle, right? Like a more junior PM might start with the basics of working with your engineering team and a few customers, understanding what needs to be built, and then working with your engineering team to build that. But as you become more and more senior and you're dealing with some of those more complex problems, you have to reach out, like further out from your own team and collaborate with other teams and influence them, make sure that their objectives and your objectives are aligned, and then you can build something bigger together.
I think that last part was really critical. The not just cross-functional, but like what we used to call cross-product area collaboration. And
Yep.
you often have to influence people pretty heavily to get to your goals.
Right.
That's a pretty big change.
Yeah, absolutely. And from there, it goes to influencing more senior people as well, right? Like if you, as you are dealing with more ambiguous problems, you are becoming more of an expert or more knowledgeable in a specific domain. You might start to see things, identify opportunities that leadership may not have the visibility to or may not be aware of. And so you start influencing them as well, and try to garner more support from leadership, more resources, because there's only so much sometimes that you can do by doing your own outreach and trying to collaborate with other teams. At times it requires like a bigger sort of strategic push, and you want to get leadership behind that so they can support you and make bigger things happen.
So let me ask, we talked a bit about the growth path, but if somebody was coming into Google and they are, let's say, looking at a group PM role, what are the essential, let's say, attributes they need to showcase for them to be able to get in at that level?
I think there are several elements. Like any company, there are obviously like rubrics and criteria, and you have to fit or like kind of meet the bar in each of those criteria. But look, I think if you start with like the most basic things, you need to show that raw sort of like intellectual horsepower, right? Like you need to have the capabilities of accomplishing these things, and interviews assess for that as well. More in general, especially if you're talking about the at the group PM level, I think you would need to already have shown early in your career, because at that level it is pretty senior for a PM at Google, and you have to show that you've already accomplished these things where you have worked to take a complex, ambiguous problem, work with customers, validate the solution, iterate, deal with challenges. It's not just about the product and customer challenges, but deal with the challenges of making these things work cross-functionally. And a lot of the questions that come up is like, in interviews is, tell me about a difficult time that you had where you ran into a wall and like you weren't able to solve something, and how did you solve that problem? Those interpersonal challenges. And so you have those the raw intellectual capability. You need to have those interpersonal skills to be able to and to drive that level of alignment and make things happen. And then of course, you need that product experience where you can show that you can actually take and identify a problem. If you're given an ambiguous problem or an ambiguous opportunity, how would you strategically approach it, and how would you sequence it? How would you measure that you're iterating and that your product is actually successful, and metrics and whatnot? So I think those are at least three categories. But at the same time, I try to not be too prescriptive because everybody's different, and one L7 might bring strengths that another L7 didn't even think about, right? So it's of course all pretty ambiguous, and even in that description.
I totally agree with that. I feel, as I've seen various product leaders at Google, they had like such different strengths, whether it was in people or pure strategy or just like getting stuff done and aligning things. Amazing to see all different types of people succeed with different strengths.
Yeah, exactly. There are some PMs who like really shine at really knowing like a lot of people in the organization, and getting bits and pieces and kind of piecing potential solutions together and driving that collaboration, and that just kind of like bringing those ideas and knowing people is their strength. There are other people that are more like sort of focused on execution, and once they've identified what they need to build, they'll make sure that it gets done right, it gets done on time. There are people whose strengths are in evangelism, right? Products that exist, and then reaching out to the community, evangelizing the products, listening back from the community and from customers, and kind of making sure that those insights get introduced into our products and incorporated. So those are just some of the dimensions, and of course, you're going to have PMs that are spike in one of those dimensions.
One last question. I know that this might come out of left field, but if you had like maybe one piece of advice to give to people who like currently product managers and are looking to manage their career to the next level, what would you tell them?
A couple of things. If there's always you could probably look up articles of like, well, what does it take to get to the next level at this company? And you'll have some criteria that you have to meet.
Yeah.
If you want to do that, definitely look up the criteria and try to meet all the, check all those boxes. You'll need to make that happen. But beyond that, I think, just be yourself and work on the things that you're passionate about. It's very difficult to excel at something. And, especially when there's like, competition and, which there always is, right? Somebody who's really passionate about what they're doing is always going to have an edge over someone who's not passionate.
Love that.
Right. So, I mean, that would be the sort of like, the last kind of, piece of advice that I can give there is like, go with that, have fun, be yourself. And maybe, also don't be afraid, right? Like you obviously, you have to be aware of what you're doing. You have to, make sure that you operate within like the bounds of what's appropriate and what's not. But don't be afraid of putting your ideas out there. Everybody's different. Everybody is, brings different ideas to the table. One example that I've said in other forums as well is that we are all like LLMs, right? And you've heard of like these larger LLMs that are model of experts. And it's kind of like that, right? Like every model is, even though the architectures might be similar, we are all trained on different data. That's why diversity is so important in the workplace, because people have different experiences, they've learned different things, and they bring value in many different ways. Somebody may care more about developers. Somebody may care more about like consumer products. Somebody may have something in their background that makes them think more about privacy and safety, and all of these things are important, and we need to make sure that all of these things are incorporated when building a product. So be yourself and work on what you're passionate about.
Cool. Sachin, thank you so much for sharing your journey, sharing your insights with us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Hey, be sure to check out our website at intentionalproductmanager.com to see how you can level up in your career.